I have long made the contention that in order to fully understand and appreciate World War II, you really need to understand and appreciate World War I. World War I is where many of the leaders and well-known figures of World War II had their baptism of fire. Men like MacArthur and Patton and Montgomery and Rommel. And also Adolf Hitler. In a prior episode of History Traveler, we went to the area where Hitler saw combat for the first time with the Bavarian 16th Reserve Infantry Regiment. So that was in late October of 1914. In November of 1914, there was some vicious fighting between the Bavarians and between the French for this set of woods right here. Patch of woods that became known as, it was known as the Croonaert Woods, and when the Bavarians took it over, became known as the Bayernwald, or the Bavarian Woods. And in December, well, Hitler and the 16th Reserve Infantry Regiment made their way up to these woods right here. Let's talk for just a moment about these woods and why this position was so important. So again, we are along the Messines Ridge, and this spot in particular is at about 40 meters above sea level, which doesn't seem especially high, but from right here, well, you can see how you really have a commanding view of the terrain around us. As a matter of fact, from right here, well, we can see all the way into Ypres. I can see the Cloth Hall. I can see the tower of the cathedral. So anyone who has this high ground is going to be able to look down on their enemy. You're going to be able to call in more accurate artillery fire, and also it's going to be easier to defend your trenches from up here. So in November of 1914, the French and Bavarians fought really hard trying to capture this site. The Bavarians were successful, and this becomes known as the Bayernwald, or the Bavarian Wood. And the Germans, again, are going to really be fighting hard to defend this. The French are going to be fighting hard to take it, and Hitler and the 16th Bavarian Reserve Infantry Regiment are going to be showing up here in December to help defend this position. We're going to come back to Hitler and his Iron Cross Second Class here in just a little bit, but for now we're going to take a step into the woods and look at some of the German trench systems that were developed here in the battle for the Ypres salient. Okay, now we're going to get back to Hitler and his Iron Cross in a little bit, but we just got into the Bayernwald here, and as you can see behind me, they actually have some reconstructed German trenches. So we're going to spend a little bit of time looking at these trenches and then go back out and talk about Hitler and his Iron Cross. All right, we're going to go ahead and dive down into these German trenches here and see what we've got. All right, so just a little bit of a backstory. This property was originally owned by a family called the Picards, and they had discovered a kind of a listening shaft that was like 25 meters deep, and ended up creating kind of like a little private museum here. And part of the museum complex was a set of trenches that Andre Picard just basically built himself. Well, in later years, they came back here and ended up reconstructing these trenches based on the original German lines that came to the edge of the Croonaert Woods. So in 1914, there would have been some primitive trenches with sandbags, and then what we are looking at now are the 1916 trenches that were dug here. All right, kicking off to the side here, I'm going to head down one of these communications trenches. And something to note, in the British trenches, the floors would have been made up of duck boards. Here you can see the German design is honestly a little bit better, in my opinion, in several different ways. Here they have boards laid out lengthwise. They also have the sides of their trenches reinforced with kind of like this wicker basket weave design. So if you look at German trenches, they have a little bit more of a permanence to them. The British and the French didn't intend to stay where they were for long. They were more intent on pushing the Germans out. So anyway, anytime you see pictures with this design here, that is a German trench. And this looks to be a mine shaft or a tunneling shaft. Okay, so there are tunneling operations that are going on in this area where both sides are trying to dig under the other, either to get troops closer to the front line or to have tunnelers digging under the enemy entrenchments or under the enemy lines and then setting explosives to blow them up. But yeah, this looks to be one of those access points. Another thing that I need to make note of as we are moving our way through these trenches, and I don't know if I've said this already, so if I did, forgive me. These are not the front line trenches. These are communication trenches and also like the second line trenches or the reserve trenches. So the front line trenches would have been just a little bit in front of the woods. All right, continuing to move through the trench system here. And as we get back to this section, well, we start seeing a little bit different variety of construction materials. Obviously getting into some bunkers. And if you have watched my channel for any amount of time, you know how much I like to visit and film derelict concrete. Construction on this is really interesting. So if you've watched any of the content that I've shot with World War II bunkers, a lot of that is poured concrete. You do see some in blocks. Obviously, these are all concrete blocks that are making up this bunker, and it doesn't look like it's exceptionally high quality. Now, there's a reason for this. So the reason that they didn't do, reinforced concrete bunkers is you're right here on the front line. You can't exactly take on some massive construction project within sight of the enemy. There's artillery constantly flying around here. So they got these prefabricated blocks that were brought here to the front. Even though these are reserve trenches, we still consider this the front. But anyway, brought them up here and then constructed these shelters. So that's exactly what these are. These are just concrete shelters for soldiers to duck in if there is a French or British, well, in this case it would have been British by this time, artillery barrage. So they started making these bunkers in 1916. So Hitler was long gone out of this area by the time these bunkers were around. But yeah, very interesting to see this. All right, we're coming up now on another one of these mine shafts, And I talked a little bit about the different tunneling operations a few minutes ago. One thing that I failed to mention as another purpose for these mine shafts was to serve as listening posts. So just in the same way that the Germans were trying to tunnel underneath the British, well, the British were trying to tunnel underneath the Germans. So here you can see the a measurement of the mine shaft, and then they would go horizontal. But you would have guys who would sit and listen to make sure that the British weren't trying to get underneath their lines. Here's another one of the bunkers here in this trench complex, and again you can see those blocks stacked up there. So quite a bit different than the World War II German bunkers that we are used to seeing. And this one, rather than having two entrances in the back, looks to have, well, I guess you could say this was one entrance for one room, and then it connected to this room over here. All right, and wow, it looks like the Germans could have maybe put down a few extra boards in this spot. That's looking a little muddy. All right, we're gonna bounce out of here and go back out to where the front line would have been and talk about Hitler for a minute. All right, well, we have moved out from the Bayernwald, and right here along this line right here is approximately where the German frontline trenches would have been. Ahead of me towards Ypres is no man's land, and it's right out here where Hitler is going to perform an action that is going to lead to him being awarded the Iron Cross Second Class. So again, out ahead of us, somewhere in this vicinity, would have been the German frontline trenches, and across the field here would have been the expanse of no man's land. On the other side of that would have been the French frontline trenches, and then of course beyond that the city of Ypres that the French are defending. And the story on Hitler's Iron Cross Second Class is kind of hazy. By this point in the conflict, he had been made a company runner. Some people might think of, a company runner as being like a lower position. That was a very dangerous place to be, honestly. So Hitler, at some point in the battle here in December, there is a wounded German soldier who is out in no man's land, and Hitler and two other soldiers went out and rescued this guy and got him back to safety. And for that he was awarded the Iron Cross Second Class. Again, the details are a little bit hazy. There's also another story that he was recommended for another Iron Cross Second Class because his regimental commander, who was a new guy, the previous one had been killed, had exposed himself to enemy fire, and Hitler and somebody else grabbed him and pulled him down before he could be shot. But anyway, regardless of what the story is, as far as the details, it's right out here in this area by the Croonaert Woods, or the Bayernwald, where Hitler performs an action that leads to him being awarded his Iron Cross. All right, well, there you go. That was a little bit on the actions here at the Bayernwald and the trenches, and the place where Adolf Hitler was awarded his Iron Cross Second Class, just adding a little extra piece of the puzzle to World War I history and to the history of Adolf Hitler.